Hi everyone, it's Neve here and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be looking at making our own stamps using some materials that are commonly available in printmaking section of a night store. So while I was in Spotlight, which is our local big craft store in Australia, I noticed that Speedball had a whole heap of new equipment that they've brought in. They're obviously being stocked by Spotlight at the moment. And one of the things they had was this eraser carving material. Now, a bit of background about me is I've done a printmaking course before, a 2-year printmaking course. Printmaking has always been a passion of mine. I've been a stamper for over 20 years, so doing something like this is something that I really enjoy doing, but it is a really easy technique, and I'm sure in the past, if you haven't carved or drawn into your eraser at school and done something similar to this, I'd be surprised. So this is like a soft rubber sheet, and all I've done is used a craft knife to cut up into some different shapes and sizes, and now all I'm doing is carving into it. Now the tools I'm using are proper woodworking lino cutting tools. They're Japanese and they're incredibly sharp, and I have absolutely no idea where I got them from. I got them while I was doing my course. But I know that Speedball does have their own carving tools and they're available in Spotlight as well. They're fairly reasonable for what you get and they're good quality. You'll notice when I was carving out, I was doing test stamps into my Use It Up journal. Now the reason for that is carving stamps is a reductive, I think, carving. So once you carve it out, obviously you can't put it back in. So you're best to carve not very much. Test it out, see what you like, see if it's what you want. If it's not, then you can continue carving and just continue testing as you go. It's a great to do that is an excellent idea, because particularly with the finer detail, and you'll see this later on with the circle stamp that I make, if there's any material left that you want to get rid of, you can see very clearly because the ink actually sits on the surface and you know what parts to remove and what parts not to. With the tools that you can see, there's a few different types of tools. There are two V-cut tools which carve really thin lines, and they're really good for carving straight lines. There are two U-shaped tools which are good for carving around curves, and so I use the U-shaped tools in this one, and the reason there's two of them is two different thicknesses, so you can get thinner lines and thicker lines. And there are also two knives in this set. Now in reality you don't need the knife if you've got a craft knife, because you can use that as well. On my desk I've got a printmaking hook. I'm not actually using it correctly. You should have your material firmly up against that ridge so you can push up against it. These instruments are incredibly sharp and cut through your finger beautifully from experience. So you always carve away from yourself, and it's best to press up against something as you're carving. If you don't have something like that, just be aware to always carve away from yourself. Go slow and always carve away from yourself. So with most of these patterns, I'm just doing fairly simple doodly patterns. This is probably the most complicated pattern, just in the fact trying to keep a circle shape. And the tools I was using with the gaps that I've got in this pattern were a little bit wide, so I was getting wonky sized circles. But I wanted a sort of rustic look, so it works in this case. Now you can see as I'm going, it's a bit hard from this angle, but on the corners especially, that you can see some ridges, and when I do my test print, you'll see how they print up. There'll be lines where I don't necessarily want lines. In all my other test prints, I've used a light ink to do that. There's no real reason why I did that, just in the fact that if I wanted to stamp it again, it was easier to see what I was doing. and I'm carving off the extra here just so it prevents when you are actually stamping something that you're going to get those extra bits. Now with this one I actually stamp it with black because you can see now where in between the dots are little bits that are raised up that obviously the ink has hit as I've been working. With this, when I was stamping it, I decided I wanted a bit more interest in it, so I've gone back and now I'm removing some of the extra parts of the circles just to put a little bit more pattern into it. So if you don't have access to some of this eraser type material, buy yourself some erasers from your newsagent and do it on that. Obviously you're going to have smaller stamps, but that's fine. You can also, from art shops, in art shops you should be able to buy some of this material. Sorry, just tangent. This one I really enjoyed doing because I didn't have a plan for it. I just made marks using the tools that I had. So whatever marks the tools made, that's what I went with, and it actually turned out to be one of my favourite stamps. If you go to a local art store, you'll be able to find this material, or you could buy lino, which will be a little bit thinner and it's a little bit tougher to cut. It's not quite as flexible, so while it will work, this stuff's probably better. But you can use all sorts of things. If you don't want to go to the expense of buying printmaking tools and lino cutting tools, the foam that you get from the packaging on your meat trays, if you clean that off, make sure it's extremely clean, cut that down and actually carve into it with a ballpoint pen or a biro, you can get a very similar effect. So that's something I do with my primary school class. Rather than getting them with tools like this, I let them at the foam instead. So this is just one of the pages I use in between my journals I'm working. Any excess paint on the edges goes onto it, and I thought it'd be fun to just stamp all over it and use it as a bit of collage sheet that I can tear up and do all sorts of different things with. So now I'm doing a stamp in my journal of all the different ones that I've created. I'm masking off a little bit there because I knew it would go over, and I'm really happy with the effect of how these came up. Now next bit, what I'm doing is going back and actually on the back side of the stamps, colouring that with the distress inks and using it as block stamping, so you get the blocks of colour. Now you can do that before and stamp over the top, or as I've done, stamp it and then put the colour over the top. And it's just a really quick way to get some colour and shape onto your journal page. The other thing is, with these stamps, because they do have some thickness to them, you can actually get twice as much value for money because you can actually carve into the other side of them and have double-sided stamps. So you can do both. Now these work really well with ink, but they also work really well with paint. So with this, I've just painted over the page that I did my test stamps on. I quite like, you can see some of the pictures coming through, and I think it's off screen because I've actually zoomed in with this. Just got some white gesso and I've braided over my stamps, and now I'm just stamping it down. So I'm just getting that black and white doodled effect. And I know Dylusions, or Dye Reevely from Dylusions, does a lot with black and white doodling, and this is a really quick and easy way to sort of replicate that. The fact that you've carved it by hand gives it that really rustic homemade effect, and you can use your favourite patterns and designs within what your stamps. If you don't have something, you can create it yourself fairly easily. Now I'm stamping down the middle of the spine, which I wouldn't usually recommend, particularly because this is a fairly new journal, so it doesn't actually have very much in the middle, and I'm just masking off in the middle here. But because it is a flexible material, it will actually bend over those areas. With the stamps as they are, they wash up really, really easily. Just a wet wipe over the top and wipe them off. Same with the paint, just wipe it off. It doesn't really matter. I'm not very good at cleaning my stamps. I don't tend to do it very often, so even if it stays on, that's fine. I would suggest, if you are using paint, however, just to wipe it off, because the more paint that builds up in the crevices, obviously it's going to block up your design just a little bit, so just be aware of that. So that's it basically. It is a really simple technique. In Australia, Spotlight has got all the materials. They're obviously just stocking it, but any good art supply shop would be able to stock all the materials I've used today. So have a go at carving your own stamps. Thanks for watching.